Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so welcome back to Helling Hall, everyone. Did everyone enjoy their breakout sessions? Yeah. That's really good to hear. Now I'm very proud to introduce our keynote speaker, State Senator Clare Oumou Verbeten. Thank you. Senator Oumou Verbeten represents District 66, which includes St. Paul, Roseville, Falcon Heights, and Lauderdale. She serves as an Assistant Majority Leader and as the Vice Chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. In 2022, the Senator made history becoming the first Black queer woman elected into Minnesota Senate. Give a round of applause for that. We love the representation. In addition to all of that, the Senator also serves as the Education, Finance, Higher Education, and Labor Committee in the Minnesota Senate. Please join me in welcoming Senator Clare Oumou Verbeten. Sorry. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I have to say I really enjoy the energy in this room. I never know exactly what to expect for these things, but it sounds like you've had a good day already. Lots of great breakout sessions, am I right? Yeah. Okay, so we'll try to keep that energy going. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to come back. I was with y'all in 2023 and shared a lot about my story and was coming off of this really exciting and historic year at the legislature where we had a DFL trifecta, and was so glad to get this invitation to come back and speak with you all. I love Students United, absolutely love working with you at the Capitol. So I wanted to try to change things up a little bit today and was thinking, what could I do that would be helpful and sort of practical? And I really wanted to focus on this theme of advocacy and action and try to share a little bit more about what advocacy means to me, and kind of those helpful tips on how to be a really effective advocate at the Capitol and really just in the work that you're all doing. So that's my plan, is to just kind of share some of that with you today. And I'll walk through, if I can go forward. I'm trying to click here. Can you help me with that? Thank you. So the agenda for this conversation today, I'm going to talk about how I became an advocate, why advocacy matters to me, advocating in partnership with students, with you all, stories of powerful advocates, and then some keys to successful advocacy. And I had in the slide earlier just my little photo of me. If we can go back, actually. I forgot to touch on this. That's a photo of little Claire getting ready to go onto the bus back in the day. I just like to keep in mind where we came from, and where I am today. I think if I told little Claire that she would end up being a senator, she'd be really excited and freaked out by speaking in front of a big group of people. But here I am, and now it's not as scary. And it's important for us to remember kind of our inner children and inner selves when we do this work. That's a big part of why advocacy is so important to me today. So with that, if you can go forward 2 slides. Thank you so much. So a little bit more about me and how I became an advocate. My family is everything to me. I really am who I am because of Rama and Hans Verbeten. Those are my parents. You can see them in my little family photo here. Although I will say my family photo is a little out of date. I just had a little one who turned 3 months today. Thank you. I'm going to try to keep you all engaged in saying that you'll see a photo of him later on in the slides. So you got to stay with me until we get to that point. But my family is so important to me. In that photo, my husband is next to me. My mom's next to him. That's my dad. And then my brother-in-law, my sister in the bottom with my nephew, and then our dog Honey. And my sister actually had a little girl who's missing from that photo too now. So we've got to, basically I'm seeing we need to update our family photos. But my parents especially, I think really instilled in me the value of public service. My mom immigrated to this country from Senegal over 30 years ago now, I believe. And she really had to start over from scratch, like so many immigrants, learning a new language and building a career and doing that while raising a family. She's so strong. She's an absolute fighter. She had a small cleaning business where she did most of the cleaning herself. I used to grow up going around and cleaning with her. And she, was one of the folks that was working really hard during the pandemic on the front lines, cleaning and keeping people safe. She's absolutely amazing, and just, I think, it has taught me to just do the right thing and stand up for people. And my dad is absolutely the same way, and is just this amazing, generous person. He's a retired teacher, spent almost 30 years with Minneapolis Public Schools. He's a proud union member as well, and really just spent those years advocating for his students and their families. So I have some really good people in my life who I think really brought those values that I hold dear, and advocating for my community is, I think, something that I learned from my parents. So after I graduated from high school, I went to American University in DC. It's my little photo of me going to our AU prom, I think, that year. And I went to American University because I was really interested in politics at that point, and I figured, let me go to DC. That seems like the place to be. And it was a great experience, and I learned a lot, and I was very homesick, and quickly realized that I wanted to be back in Minnesota, and that I wanted to really focus on local and state politics, and that's a place where I felt like I could make a lot of change. And when I came back here, I started working on campaigns. I worked for the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. I eventually ended up working on the Walls Flanagan campaign. This is a photo of me with our now Lieutenant Governor, also U.S. Senate candidate, her mom, and then my mom as she was filing that day. And I like to tell folks that I helped a lot of other people run for office before I decided to run myself. And it was probably the best thing I did to learn how this thing works. There's not really a guidebook on how to run for office or how to get into this policy work. You kind of just have to rip the Band-Aid off and just start doing it. And I'm really grateful for the people who gave me those opportunities and the campaigns I got to work on, and people that I got to meet who are mentors and friends to me today. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. There he is. I promised you. That's Leo, my little Leo. He was also born in August, so he is a Leo. He is definitely the center of my world now. But I think a lot of why I got into this work is just kind of because of who I am. I'm a young, Black, queer woman, daughter of an immigrant, now a mom, which is the best title ever. And, we're living in these really scary times where even just some of the identities that I hold are under attack. People are getting snatched up in the streets right now. Kids are being, just attacked for who they are and for living their truth. It's really scary, and this is why we have to keep fighting. And I think showing that we're proud of who we are, and I wear all those identities really proudly because that's made me who I am today. And that's what America and Minnesota and certainly my district looks like, is this beautiful, diverse community. My community is also, it includes Falcon Heights, where Philando Castile was killed by the police 9 years ago. And that's another big reason why I decided to run for office. I really wanted to address police brutality and work on police accountability legislation. I felt so down and frustrated in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, and just seeing us continue to have these instances in Minnesota and being like, when are we going to do something about this? And so getting into the legislature and being able to serve as the vice chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee has been amazing, because I've been able to work on so much legislation there that I'll try to touch on a little bit more in this presentation. But that's a big part of why I do this work and what I'm passionate about. And then, of course, my future is little Leo and all the little babies that are out there. I think we've got to work to build a better, world for them. And becoming a parent has really put a lot of things into perspective for me. And to try to connect this back to some of our higher education issues, how many of you are familiar with the state grant? Okay, I see a lot of hands. I love that. So we had this deficit in the state grant this year, though I think we're going to continue to face that going into next session. But as we were working on it this last session, I was really digging into the details of the formula and seeing how our students who were parents or our students who were independent were going to be impacted, and some of the proposals that we were seeing just would have had really horrible effects on particularly our student parents. And so as I was carrying little Leo in my tummy this year, I just, was really focused on what we could do to make sure that our student parents were not getting screwed over by the changes that we were making to the state grant and to that formula. And I'm proud of a lot of what we got done. There's still a lot of work to do. And things like just increasing the amount of resources that we had for our child care grants was a big focus for me on the higher education committee. So that's a lot of what matters to me. I also have this photo here of when I got sworn into the Senate, which was really exciting, historic day. I should say that in addition to, myself making history as one of the first Black women in the Senate, I came in with two others, so three of us got to do it together. Myself, Senator Zaina Mohammed, and then Senator Erin May Quaid. And they are also amazing advocates. All right, we'll hop to the next one. So, advocating in partnership with students. Y'all are amazing, and I think you should give yourself a round of applause for what you've already been doing. I just wanted to quickly highlight some things that I've been able to work on with students. Menstrual equity, are folks familiar with that bill here? Love it. So making sure that we have menstrual products available on our college campuses, that was one of the bills that I got to work on in 2023 with Students United, with other amazing students who advocated at the Capitol. Emergency assistance grants, does that ring a bell for folks? Yes. That was also a bill that I got to work on in 23, and again, this last session in 2025. I know how important it is to make sure that we have those funds available for students when something comes up and you need support with housing or with transportation. The things that students these days have to deal with, I will say it's a large reason why I wanted to be on the Higher Education Committee. As one of the youngest people in the Senate, I felt like a lot of my colleagues just don't realize how different it is to go to college these days, and how expensive it is, and how expensive the cost of education is itself, but also the cost of living and the sacrifices you have to make in order to be in school. So many, parents that are doing this, students who have other jobs that they're juggling, right, while going to school. It looks very different now, I think, than it did for the generations before us. And emergency assistance grants are a huge part of keeping our students in school. So I was really proud to work on that with students. And then I got to work on this cool bill this year, free water. Are folks familiar with that? Okay, so that's just to make sure when you go to like large event spaces and venues that you have access to free water. Sounds pretty basic, but being able to either like bring in a water bottle or make sure that the venue has access to a refillable station for you in there. It was a big issue for students. A lot of students who were, going to concerts, seeing folks who were, passing out because they didn't have access to water. They were, they charged like $10 for this water bottle, and like that should just be a human right to have access to water. So I worked on that with my, thank you. I worked on that with my Representative Lee Finke. She did an amazing job getting that across the finish line. I really have to credit her. But we had some amazing students who also came and testified on that bill. So just to show that students are working on like not just higher education issues, but broadly issues that impact your life. And I've seen that firsthand at the Capitol. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to share a little bit more about like a very specific story of some powerful advocates that I know. These two women, Brianna on the left in this photo of the three of us, and then Megan on the right, are these amazing advocates who I worked with to help get them out of prison over the course of the last 2 years. And their moms, Linda and Tony, who are in this bottom photo with me, they really worked on getting this bill passed, this felony murder law reform bill passed. And they are probably like the most powerful advocates that I have encountered in my time at the legislature, and I wanted to share a little bit more about this story. So when I got elected in 2023, I was asked to serve on a panel for the Minnesota Justice Research Center. They had invited the chairs and the ranking members of the public safety committees to come and talk about the upcoming session. And I think I had been in the job for like 2 or 3 weeks and came to the panel, and they're asking about a lot of these specific bills. And my whole kind of vibe for that panel was like, yep, count me in, criminal justice reform, you got it. If Representative Frazier, any Representative Frazier fans in the room? If not, you should be. He's amazing. He was on the panel, and I was like, anything Representative Frazier carries, yep, you got it. I'll carry it in the Senate. I'm on board. And like a week or so after that, I was walking around in the Senate building around my office, and Linda and Tony stopped me and were like, we saw you at the panel, and our daughters are in prison for these murders that they didn't commit, and we want to talk to you. We think you'd be a really great advocate for them. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, let's do it. Let's set up the time. And I met with them, and they told me their stories, and I was absolutely blown away. Their daughters had, I would say, really been through a lot, and it started with them being victims of sexual assault, going down a path of substance abuse and just like really destructive behavior, and got into in a really tough situation one night where they were going to get drugs, and a group of their friends had invited some guys to come help them. Those guys that they had never met before brought guns, proceeded to severely beat these men in the apartment where they were going to try to get the drugs. They killed a man. It was horrible. The girls were threatened over the course of that whole interaction. Were told if they messed anything up, they would not hesitate at all to kill them. We're certainly, victims in this situation as well. were terrified, and shortly after were charged with first-degree murder. And that's because of a doctrine that exists that essentially says if you are, an accomplice in any way to a murder, you can be charged the same as the person who actually committed the murder. So even though they had no intention to go in there and murder someone, it was an awful tragedy, they ended up facing, life without parole, the absolute worst situation. And so they took a plea down to second degree, which is something that happens a lot in these felony murder cases, and were sentenced to 13 years. And I think about 5 years into their sentence is when I met their moms, Linda and Tony, and they told me this story. And so I was immediately invested, and knew that this was wrong and that this was an injustice. And just to further add to that, they told me all the research that they had done, all the people that they had met in prison after, this had happened to their daughters, that there were so many more cases of felony murder, so many young people especially, and actually a lot of young women of color who, a lot of the same story of being in abusive, coercive relationships, oftentimes had no idea that a murder had occurred and were kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they ended up being faced with these charges. And so there was these huge disparities with how felony murder was charged in Minnesota. And so seeing that racial injustice as well, that being such an important issue to me, I was like, yes, I am on board. What can I do? How can I help? And after meeting with them as well, I was like, this is, thank you for sharing your stories with me and for telling me this, but I really want to meet them. And I had organized a tour of the Shakopee women's prison with my fellow members of the Judiciary Committee. And so we went and we met with a number of women there who were charged with felony murder and who were in the same situation as Megan and Brianna. We met with them as well. They shared their stories with us. They were kind and generous enough to do that. And hearing that firsthand, again, I was like, we've got to get this done. We've got to get this passed. One important piece I should say about this bill is that, when we work on legislation at the Capitol, we're changing things, right? That's the nature of legislation, is let's change things and let's do something differently. But a lot of times with bills in this space of criminal justice, we make a change moving forward, but there's people behind us, right, who weren't able to take advantage of that change, right? They were charged when the law was what it was in the past. That was certainly the case for Megan and Brianna. So we really wanted to make sure that this law was retroactive and that there was a path for people who were previously charged under the felony murder doctrine to get a path to get that off their record, or if they were in prison to get out. And that was tough. And we were in a trifecta, but some of these issues, I will say, were ambitious things for me to take on, especially as a freshman legislator, and are not we didn't have a guarantee that we were going to have all the votes for that. I had to push really hard and have a lot of conversations, and I really credit especially their moms for working so hard to meet with legislators, not just Democrats, Republicans. They got 2 Republicans actually on this bill to make it bipartisan. They just kept talking to everyone they could and sharing this story. But it was a lot of work to get that done. But I'm glad to say that we did get it passed in 2023. Thank you. I will say the story doesn't end there. Most bills go into effect in August, and that August, as the bill was going into effect and as they were getting ready to apply, we realized, oh my gosh, there is a typo in this bill. Literally an and instead of an or. So one of my takeaways for you is read your bills very carefully. But that typo meant that the bill wasn't retroactive, that it actually wasn't. It was really devastating to find out. And so we quickly scrambled to get together a chair's letter where the chairs of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committees, along with myself and the other co-author in the House, signed it saying like, hey, we made a mistake, this is a typo, we didn't catch this, kind of in the hectic busyness of the end of session. And we're going to change it first thing, in the 2024 session, but we really encourage you to, proceed with interpreting the law as we intended. And this was going to, the judicial branch. So Linda and Tony used that in their application for their daughters. The judge looked at that letter, and that is why they were able to get out. We hadn't actually made that change yet, but it was early in 2024 where they completed their application process. The judge thankfully listened to us and accepted that letter and released them that day. Story still doesn't end there. And so then we, session started. We needed to get this bill passed. Like I said, these things can be challenging, even in trifectas. There was one legislator who was sort of a holdout on this bill and was having second thoughts about retroactivity, even after some people had, received the retroactivity through the letter that we had sent. So we went all the way to the end of session, and I remember just being so worried. I was like, I have tried everything, every argument with this person, I don't know what else to do. And Linda and Tony they're such amazing, fierce mamas, and great people, and they're women of faith. And I was like, can you just pray that this person's gonna change their mind? I don't know what else we can do. We're just gonna have to, hope and pray for the best, and let's just start the prayer circles and keep it going, and know that we did everything we could. And thankfully, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 days before session was ending that one last holdout had changed their mind, and we were good to go, and we got it passed. So again, a huge relief. I should point out too, how grateful I am to all of them. At that point, it was Linda and Tony, their moms, but also Megan and Brianna themselves, because they were out. They were advocating for this so hard, and they were out, right? They were still fighting for the people who were in prison. They were still fighting for, the other families who hadn't been able to access this relief yet, when they could have, just stopped at that point. So I had so much respect for them for continuing to fight so hard. And then I have a photo at the top there of Brianna, who in the 2025 session, she then was able to come forward and start advocating herself on kind of the next round of this bill. There's still some folks who were left out of even what we did pass. And she came and she shared, her stories, and she talked about the women that she met and her roommate, and that, this is truly an injustice, and there's still people who are impacted by that doctrine that we need to change that bill. And I thought it was so cool to go from, meeting her mom, hearing her story, working on getting that bill passed, seeing her get out of prison, and then her coming out and coming to the Capitol and speaking for herself. They are such amazing people. So, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. I want to highlight for you what I think made particularly those folks such amazing advocates, but this goes for other folks that I've worked with too at the Capitol. Sharing your story, it sounds so simple, but sharing those personal stories matter. And I can tell you, my perspective as a legislator, when I'm personally invested in something, I'm gonna work so hard for you. When they told me their stories, I was like, okay, I see myself in them. They're around my age. I see you fighting for your kids the way I feel like my parents would be fighting for me. I'm in, we're going to get this done. I will keep fighting with you. And they really worked to build a relationship with me as the author and the author that they had in the house. I think getting to know people as people, right, is so important. And for us as legislators, trying to figure out what things we care about, what our passions are. Like when you know that going into a conversation with a legislator and you can speak to those things that you know they're passionate about and they care about, that's going to really help you get them invested in your issue. And I will say that one of my co-authors on this bill, one of the Republican co-authors who came with us when we went to Shakopee to visit Megan and Brianna and the other women impacted by the felony murder law reform bill, he told me like he was speechless after hearing those women speak, right? So those stories do matter, and those relationships really do matter, and they can change people's minds. And lastly, never give up. They had been working on that for years. Like, I came in this really great year in 2023 where we had the trifecta, and we, had the votes to get a lot of things done, and I got to pass a lot of bills, and I'm proud of that. But I always say that, like, I kind of showed up right at the finish line to just take things right over, but there's so many people who worked for years, for decades on things, right? And then finally there was just the right group of people there who could get it across the finish line. And the second their daughters were charged, right, they never stopped fighting. They dug in, they learned the law, they started meeting with any legislator who would meet with them. They kept pushing for that change. And I think that, this advocacy work is like generational, and it can be decades long fights. When I got in some of the like hallmark legislation that we passed that year, I think about like restoring the vote to formerly incarcerated folks, banning conversion therapy, driver's licenses for all. Like those were like 20 years in the making, so you gotta just keep going and never give up. And I think of it as more of a marathon than a sprint. With that being said, you all are leaders, and I know that you are doing this work because I've been able to work on some really great legislation with you already. And so I would say, like, I see you and keep going. I know it can feel really hard right now in the environment that we're in, but there's some amazing people who want to hear your stories, who want to work with you, who want to build those relationships with you at the Capitol. I'm certainly one of them, so count me in on that fight, and count me in as a partner in this work, and I'm excited to keep going forward with you. And with that, my next slide is really just if there's any questions. I see some hands. Yay. Let's go right there at the end first.
Hi, my name is Ivy. I'm here from Hennepin College. My question is, how many women have been released since that law?
Okay, the question was how many women have been released since that law. And I should probably know that exact answer, and I don't. But I will tell you that I know when we went to do that visit, there were 4 women that we met with, and 3 of the 4 that I met with were released. So of that specific subset, it's like 75%, which is pretty good. Yes. I am absolutely not only allowed but thrilled to share. I will say one bill that I continue to work on that's kind of been my little baby since 2023 is it's called Minnesota Connecting Families, and it's to remove the fees that incarcerated folks and their families are charged to communicate with one another. So there's phone calls, there's, thank you. There's phone calls, there's video calls, there's emails and messages, and a lot of different ways that we communicate, and those are all different forms of communication that are available in our prisons. But the fees are outrageous, and I could talk about this forever, but like the kind of short version is that there's monopolies, and there's some big companies that just dominate this market, and they charge these outrageous fees. And a third of families with an incarcerated loved one actually go into debt specifically because of this issue of just trying to stay in touch with their loved ones. And we know that, when you're able to have that communication, it's so key to making sure that people are successful and they thrive when they're released. And like 95% of people are going to be released. So we really should be investing in things that are gonna make sure that they're successful. It's also just the right thing to do, and it's heartbreaking. And again, being a mom now, I think about a lot of those women that I met in Shakopee who are moms, right? And they're trying so hard to continue to stay in touch with their kids and just can't afford to do so. So what we did get done in 2023, we got calls passed, which is great. So phone calls are free. I'm continuing to work on video calls and messaging and all forms of communication so that there's no fees around that. So that's important to me going into this next year. Trying to think if there's some other bills that are on the docket. I mean, there's a lot of victim services work that I've been a part of too. I think, this system just that we have is really not just, and everyone is just kind of hurt by it. And our crime victims are like in a really tough situation right now because a lot of the funding that we used to receive from the federal government is going away, and so there's a lot of like shelters, domestic violence shelters that are at risk of being closed and shut down. And so I'm trying to work on finding those permanent funding solutions so that when you're in one of the most horrible times of your life, as a victim of a crime, that there are those resources available to you. So those are two things I'm definitely gonna be working on next session.
Hey, my name is Hassan. I am the Region 6 representative. I'm also Director of Advocacy at Minneapolis College. We represent Minneapolis College and St. Paul College, and I first want to thank you for being here, sharing your story and the priorities and initiatives that you're supporting. You've spoken a lot about the incarcerated experience. I think that the Twin Cities area is known for our TREC program, which is Transformation and Reentry through Education and Community. You have shared stories about how you've helped young women get out, and we have young women in our program that are formerly incarcerated. It is a college and prison program that offers an alternative and second chance for formerly incarcerated and otherwise justice impacted scholars to be successful in completing. It actually has some of the best retention rates, some of the best success rates compared to non-incarcerated students and otherwise non-justice impacted individuals as they pursue the same goals within the same time frame. My question is, understanding that power dynamic between DOC, the state legislature, and the institutions themselves, how would you advise us as student leaders to really leverage this space, this opportunity, to push so that the legislature can, lean on the DOC to remove the barriers? Because the reality is that the incarcerated students, we got about like 300 of them between Metro State and Minneapolis College. They're still paying through FAFSA. They're still paying like tuition, but who's really representing them? And then we also know that they don't get the equal access to the supports and resources that funding, is supposed to be there to provide. I'm asking, yeah, basically, how would you advise and guide us to kind of not only expand that opportunity, because I know that there's mentorship right now, Minnesota Consortium of Higher Education in Prison, but how do we really like use this space and this vehicle to support that and be that conduit between legislature and DLC to make sure that even our incarcerated scholars are still having that opportunity to pursue higher education?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for bringing up track because it is absolutely amazing and it's clear. Round of applause for track. I love whenever I get to work on like the intersection of my two favorite committees, Judiciary, Public Safety, and Higher Education, and that's such a good example. And everything you said is spot on, and there are so many barriers through the Department of Corrections, DOC, that has been one of the most frustrating parts of this job is trying to work through that. I think a lot of times we don't realize that, like, as legislators, like you pass a bill and you're like, yes, I got it done, right? And then the work actually doesn't stop there. You got to follow up on how it's implemented, and particularly on any of these issues in the Department of Corrections, there's a lot of work to keep digging there and make sure that it's being implemented correctly, or that there's the right funding sources, or that there's not barriers that they're placing, you know, for people to access things that we intended for them to access. In terms of just like my suggestions, really the things that I did say around sharing your stories and building the relationships and keep going, right? Like keep talking about this, definitely apply. Get to know the folks who are on those committees, right? So I'm one of those folks who serves on both of those committees. Get to know your legislators, the people who actually represent you where you live. Reach out to them and talk to them about, you know, the issues that are important to you. Like, we do flag things that come from our constituents, and there's nothing better than when you get to work with like your constituent on an issue that matters to them. So try to do that, absolutely. Yeah, count me in. I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of those problems, and I'm like, it's frustrating, and I know it's going to continue to be a thing that I'm going to have to keep fighting on as, you know, as I'm in the legislature. So I want to thank you for your work, and I know, like, you totally get it. As you were saying everything, I was just like, yep, sounds like the department, sounds like the things that I've seen. And invite us also to come to classes. There's like amazing professor who I was really trying to come visit her class this summer, that it didn't totally work out with me getting a little too close to when I was about to go into labor. But I would love to visit those classes. I know other legislators would. Like, when people actually like meet folks and like are like see it in action too, you know, that's different than even just talking about it. The story that I was sharing about like the Republican co-author I had when he was at Shakopee and he heard those stories directly from those women, like that was like a pivotal moment, right? And I think when you get people in the room and they see it, that's when you start to get them invested. So invite folks. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. All right. My name is Tushar Joshi, and I'm from St. Cloud State University. As of now, I'm the vice president for the student body there, and this is my third year in the student government. I would like to thank you first, Senator Clare, for sharing your story and being a voice for people around you. My question would be a little long. It's a build-up to the whole point we talked about. Listening to your work on the grant money which institutions receive across Minnesota, we also heard about how you're helping in the family part, which is involved in the formula of distributing that fund. A big part of institutions getting that grant money is cost of attendance, and which institutions, so whichever universities or any institution across Minnesota have a higher tendency of a higher tuition rate for students tend to get more grants if we go through that formula. And it becomes a loophole of lobbying back and forth for whether it be a tuition increase or a decrease. Because either way, it's the university taking ahead or the students taking ahead. If you take from our standpoint of view, with less appropriations, having higher grants need cost of attendance increase. With less appropriation, the university takes ahead, and with increase in the cost of attendance, the students will be taking ahead. So how do we plan to tackle that in terms of making it better for both the university and students? Because when a university comes to the Senate body to ask for a tuition increase, it does make sense when they're asking for the right thing. However, the students would definitely be taking ahead. But as students, it's hard to make other students understand that if we don't increase it, the university is going to take ahead. So what is your point of view on that, and how do we plan to tackle it?
Yeah. Again, this is why I said you all are already doing the work and already are the advocates. So, like, maybe the advice I have is like, we should just get out of the way and just listen to everything that you're telling us to do. Please tell more of my colleagues to get on board. But everything that you said about the state grant is spot on, and it is, it's just one of the things in the legislature that just bothers me so much, how that operates, and the cost of tuition is such a big part of that. And like, what I will say is in the committee, like when we look at our budget, there are kind of these three big buckets, and it's funding the systems, right? So like funding the Minnesota State system, funding the University of Minnesota system, and then the state grant, which is like in a lot of ways seen as like funding the private schools, the other system, the third system. And I get frustrated with the state grant because whenever the private institutions raise their tuition, right, and then we've got this grant where it just, the money follows the student. So if the cost of tuition is higher, there's more money going there because it costs more to go to that school. And that comes at the expense of our public institutions. So it's essentially a voucher program for private colleges, and there's a lot of reforms I think that are needed, and certainly bills that I've been working on to try to cap that so that it doesn't get out of hand, and that we're able, because if we're not spending so much on one student, essentially, like who's going to a higher cost university, then we could help more students who are going to our public universities, essentially, right, to a lower cost university. So I think that's a big change that's needed. And it can be hard to like help people understand that totally, because it can get really into the weeds on the formula. But definitely spend time like talking to the members of the higher education committee who are more familiar about why we need to first like adequately fund the systems, because if they don't have the funding needed, they're gonna have to raise tuition. It's very difficult. I will say I'm very proud to be a champion for public education, and I wish that we had more of those in the legislature. So, you know, as we have openings too, this is another piece of this work, is like, you know, advocating with the people who are there in the legislature. But then like when people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's what elections are for. And when those opportunities pop up, and there are retirements that are happening right now, so like look at where you live and who represents you, and think about running for office yourself. Or like if you see someone who's running and you see these amazing champions for public education, support them, you know, volunteer for their campaigns, or go to caucuses and conventions, and make your voice heard so they can get endorsed, and you know, be your representative. That's the kind of the other part of this work too, right? Is like the campaign cycle, and trying to get the right people in office who support us and who share our values, and who are going to do what we want them to do. So that's what I would say we got to work on. But count me in.
I
I have the terrible task
Okay.
of cutting this short, which is so sad because I can talk about the state grant all day, all day. Everyone, please give a huge round of applause for Senator Clare Oumou Verbeten.